Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're here today to officially launch the public consultation phase of the government's minimum wage project. Before I go any further, let me introduce the panel. I'm sure they need no introduction, but to my immediate left, we have the Honourable Tara Rivers, Minister with responsibility for employment. Next to her, we have Mr. Lemuel Hurlston, who is the Chairman of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. Over on the far left is Mr. Nick Joseph, who is the Deputy Chairman of the committee. And to my right is Ms. Tammy Ebanks, who is the Acting Deputy Chief Officer in the Ministry with responsibility for labour and employment, and who is the liaison for the Ministry to the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. As I said, the purpose of this morning's press conference is to launch the public consultation phase of the minimum wage project. In June of this year, the Cabinet authorised the creation of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. The committee has been meeting since then diligently in addressing the many facets and issues associated with minimum wage in terms of establishing a minimum wage for the country, making sure that it's sustainable and enforceable. The committee is made up of 12 persons, and the design of the committee is to guarantee equal representation. So there are 4 members who are independent members, there are 4 employee representative members, and there are 4 employer representative members. The committee is also supported by the ministry in terms of funding for its activities. It's also supported in terms of the liaison officer, Ms. Ebanks, who I just introduced, and also a secretariat in the ministry who takes care of the administrative functions on behalf of the committee. We're also supported by several ex officio members from various other government entities, including Immigration, Department for Labour and Pensions, the Economics and Statistics Office. And the timeline, I know there was some movement on the timeline, so I'd like to explain that. Originally, the timeline for this project was set to February 2015. We set out very ambitiously to try to deliver the report by October the 31st of this year. However, given the breadth and depth of the exercise and given the need to ensure that proper public consultation takes place, the committee asked for the exercise to be pushed back. We now have a completion date of February 2015, the original date, and the committee is well on target to meeting that date. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Minister who will speak on the political and Cabinet mandate in terms of the project.
Thank you, Acting Chief Officer, and good morning, everyone, and good morning to everyone that is listening and viewing the press conference live as we are here today. It is with great pleasure that, as Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, that I'm here to publicly help the committee kick off the public consultation phase of the minimum wage project, as the Acting Chief Officer said. I think it's important, first of all, though, that we actually look to why do we actually have this process? Why did we actually have to go the route of convening a minimum wage advisory committee? And in order to do that, it's very important to actually look to the law itself. And so the labour law that's in effect currently, the 2011 revision, section 21, basically authorizes, it says governor, but it's to be read as cabinet now, may, by order, prescribe a national minimum wage. However, it goes on to say that this order may only be made after consideration of recommendations made to the minister by a minimum wage advisory committee established under Section 21. So it's very clear that the decisions regarding a minimum wage has to be informed by that work of the minimum wage advisory committee. So it's not discretionary. It says it may only be made. If you look to Section 21, it goes on to talk about the establishment of a minimum wage advisory committee, that the Cabinet may establish this committee to investigate and inquire into all matters related to the appropriate level of a national minimum basic wage and to make recommendations as to the minimum rates of wages which should be payable. So again, the mandate here is very clear in that the expectation is that the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee will be looking at a number of variables necessary in order to help the government and cabinet make an informed decision about what an appropriate minimum wage advisory or minimum wage regime for the Cayman Islands should be. So and then the law goes on to talk about the membership as well, because I know there were some comments or concerns about why such a large committee and why do you need to have these representation. The law actually says that the committee shall comprise of no less than 8 members. So it specifies a minimum number, and that you must have equal representation of both employees and employers. And basically, through the research that myself and members of the ministry did with respect to coming up with what this committee should entail, the law also does specify that other representatives may be appointed depending on what interests the government is looking to hear from. And so looking at what other jurisdictions have done, namely in the UK, the Low Pay Commission and other regional jurisdictions as well, the tripartite relationship, which I think is important and which we try to capture by actually appointing additional equal numbers of independent representatives, was important. And as you'll hear further, the chair and the deputy chair are both independent representatives in that, to make sure that there isn't any perceived bias on any one interest versus the other. And so that is how we've come up with 12 members as opposed to the minimum of 8. But as I said, the law does say any other interest that the government felt was important. And from our perspective, we felt that having that balance was very important, and to make sure that we could capture the essence of the concerns expressed or the interests expressed by both employees as well as employers, but always being guided with an independent lens. A bit more in terms about the actual establishment of the committee. It was also important, obviously, as a minister responsible for gender affairs, that we had a committee that has a good representation of both gender perspectives. And as you know, you will see that many of the people most affected in this area potentially could be a large proportion of that could be one gender versus the other. So again, with a view to ensure that we had equal participation of both men and women at the decision-making level, at the consideration level, the ministry strove very hard, and I think we were very successful in actually coming up with a committee that has a good, strong gender balance as well. So that just gives an overview as to why it was necessary to go this route. I also want to express the fact that, you know, this is something that has been discussed in the Cayman Islands for decades. This process has been in our law since, at least in its current form, since the 1987 version of the labor law. However, this government, and you know, under my leadership as minister responsible for this area, we have taken action to do more than just talk about the issue, and we've now actually done and taken the process in earnest, with the expectation that the report will help the government make an informed decision about what that wage regime should be. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to the chair of the committee to talk more about the specifics.
Thank you very much, Minister Rivers and Acting Chief Officer Saku. As you've heard, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee held its first meeting on the 3rd of June this year. We've had a total of 19 meetings. We've been meeting almost on a weekly basis. And during those meetings, we have been addressing 9 primary things. And I'm just going to go through those 9 key issues for you very quickly. We began by reviewing and restructuring our terms of reference to take and capture additional points that might have been raised by members of the committee. We reviewed some research internationally and came up with a statement of purpose. We secured an independent consultant through the ILO, and he's a senior specialist for employment and labor market policies, and we met with him in his Trinidad office via Skype. His name is Mr. Reynold Simmons. We then received a presentation by the Economic and Statistics Office on important data to be considered and evaluated. We've received a presentation by the International Labour Organization Senior Specialist for Employer Activities, Mrs. Ann Knowles, who visited the Cayman Islands earlier, compliments of the Chamber of Commerce. We've received a presentation by the Department of Children and Family Services on data that they hold and processes for better understanding how families are determined to be poor in the Cayman Islands. We've met with representatives of the Cayman Islands Tourism Association on the unique makeup of the tourism industry and how the implementation of a minimum wage may affect that industry. We've developed plans, as we're launching today, for a public consultation process to gain information and public feedback. We've just yesterday met with representatives of the Cayman Islands Contractors Association on how the implementation of a minimum wage may affect that industry. The public consultation process is a rather important one. The public has a right to know and the public has a right to participate, and this is an opportunity for that to happen. Our technical consultant is assisting the committee in collating and analyzing the information from the Economic and Statistics Office and other sources in order to assist us in actually determining range of figures for a possible minimum wage. Finally, I would like to publicly thank the members of the committee, particularly the Deputy Chair and everyone, for the commitment that they have shown to this process and for the hard work undertaken to date. And I will end with my favorite saying, which is, the reward for work is usually more work. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to ask Mr. Joseph to just take us through and speak a little bit on the public consultation phase, and then we'll have Tammy wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. It's good, Honourable Minister. The first phase of the public consultation will run from today until the 30th of November. There will be district meetings scheduled for January of next year in order to wrap up the final phase of public consultation. Committee members in the coming weeks will be attending various radio talk shows and making television appearances to promote the consultation process and to hear from the public on their opinions as appropriate. There are also surveys which are very important for the public to complete, and there will be focus group sessions on which Tammy will give more detail. It should be noted that the committee is going to the community with questions that we would like answered and has focused on these specific areas to directly inform our work. It should also be noted, and as our consultant has indicated to us, that this is the start of an ongoing process. For a minimum wage to be effective in any country, it must be reviewed often, and there must be enforceable legislative sanctions to ensure that employers are adhering to the law. The committee will therefore be including in its report recommendations for methods by which the necessary enforcement processes can be incorporated into any changes that are put forward.
Good morning. As has been said, important part of the process of this process is the public consultation process, and basically the best decisions that government and the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee will be making is when you have relevant data in front of you. So this part of the process I'll be talking about is the public consultation, how we're gathering the information. There's 4 ways in which we're going to gather the information in the public consultation process: completed surveys, focus group meetings, district meetings, and accepting written submissions. There are 5 surveys which are aimed at a particular sector of the community. These surveys will help the committee in gathering important information that isn't readily available for us based on the data that we've already collected. The 5 surveys have been designed with the technical assistance of the ILO consultant, ESO, and the Ministry Secretariat. The 5 surveys are for household employers, and those are persons who employ domestic helpers, nannies, groundskeepers, gardeners within their home. The second survey would be for household employees, and those are persons who are employed within another person's home as domestic helpers, nannies, groundskeepers, gardeners, etc. The third would be for business employers, those who own a private sector business. And ideally, we're hoping to target those businesses who employ the majority of those in low-paying wages. And then the fourth one would be business employees, those who are employed in private sector, particularly industries that we have identified as having lower-paid employees. And the fourth one is for the general public, which is for students, retirees, civil servants, and the unemployed. To access the surveys, the public would need to go online to www.education.gov.ky/minimum wage. It will be live this afternoon. The surveys will be removed from the website on the 1st of December. So the public has until the 30th of November to complete the surveys. Printed surveys will also be in all districts as of next week. We'll have them in all the libraries, the government admin building, UCCI, different places where the public can access them. During the month of November, representatives from the Economics and Statistics Office will be going out and actually targeting businesses and households on all 3 islands to encourage the surveys to be completed. We're estimating about 1,400 households and 200 businesses being targeted. In addition to the town hall meetings that will be scheduled early in the new year, the committee is going to be conducting 3 focus group meetings to hopefully increase our chances of getting qualitative data with purposeful discussions. The focus group meetings are as follows: in Cayman Brac on Saturday, the 25th of October. And these are 2-hour sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The morning session is targeting employers, and that means both household and business employers. And the afternoon session would be targeting employees, household and business employees, and the unemployed Caymanians. The Grand Cayman session will be on Thursday, the 30th of October in the evening at the Family Life Center. And the 2-hour session would be targeting youth or students, household employees who observe a Saturday Sabbath, and unemployed Caymanians. The third one would be in Grand Cayman on Saturday, the 1st of November at the Family Life Center. And that 2-hour session, again, would be the same format as Cayman Brac, where in the morning we'll be discussing the issues with employers, both household and business, and one in the afternoon with employees and unemployed Caymanians. And we're just encouraging anyone who would be interested in taking a part of the focus group to contact the committee at minimumwage@gov.ky or by calling 244-3151. And we're also accepting written submissions by sending either to the email or to the ministry's postal address.
Thank you, Tammy. Hopefully we've outlined the work of the committee, the progress made so far, and the launch of public consultation and the importance of public consultation to you all. And with that, I'll open it up to the floor for any questions.
Hey, good morning. Can I ask the Minister, the process from the point of you receiving the report in February to actually a minimum wage coming into place, if that decision has been taken yet, that a minimum wage will come into place and this is deciding just what it is, and B, how long would it take from you getting the report to people seeing that in their pay packets?
Well, the mandate given to the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee was to advise on what the appropriate regime would be, whether it would be, so what that entails. So that in itself is indication that the government intends to implement a minimum wage regime for the Cayman Islands. We have obviously asked them to do exactly what the law says and consider all the factors when it comes to making its recommendations. To answer your question about the timing after that, obviously the government has to make that decision. So it's not myself as minister, but Cabinet would make the decision based on the recommendations of the advisory committee. So as soon as we get the report, then that process will start in earnest.
So it's not a possibility that they would come back with no minimum wage as the recommendation?
Well, that would be ultra-virus what the mandate was with respect to given the looking at what that regime should be. Now, I do anticipate that there will be lots of discussion in the report about various price points of certain minimum wages and how that would affect, employment opportunities as well as business opportunities, etc. But ultimately, government is responsible and will make a decision as to what the minimum wage regime should be for the Cayman Islands.
It seems, just from the way the consultation sessions are structured, that there's at least going to be some consideration of a tiered minimum wage with perhaps different settings for domestic workers or perhaps people in waged, industries where tipping is part of the compensation. Is that correct? Can somebody explain that a bit further?
Yes, I think it is correct to say that there is a possibility of a tiered set of recommendations coming forward. The committee has made no such determination as yet, but it is conceivable and possible. The committee is minded to argue the case both pro and con in respect of the impacts of a minimum wage on the economy and the society. And in so doing, it will have to consider those impacts from every possible angle.
Is there a consideration of anything beyond wages? I mean, this may be something that's beyond this committee, but perhaps for the Minister. Seems that an equally important issue is the amount of overtime. People are being asked to work at flat rate, which is currently allowable under the labour law. We've heard stories of people working 80 and 90-hour weeks for $4 and $5 an hour. Is that something that you'll look to deal with in another way, or is on your radar at all?
Well, we are looking to make some amendments to the labour law, which is a separate discussion, and I wouldn't really want to involve that at this stage. But suffice it to say that, you know, the purpose of today is to basically inform the public about what is actually happening with respect to moving the process of determining an appropriate minimum wage. There will be, as I said, amendments to the labour law, and that discussion and that bill is actually being produced as we speak. So without actually going down that route or preempting any of the recommendations that come back from that process, I'd like to just park that question for now.
That's something we'll see at some point in the
future? Yes, we plan to have a consultation bill by the end of this year.
Coming back to the timeline question, let me see if I could pin you down a little bit. Have you given yourself a deadline by when you would like to see this change made to the law? I know that Cabinet needs to look at it. It's a question for government, but has Cabinet/government said this is when we absolutely need to have a change to the law?
Well, to be very blunt with the response, the answer is no. There isn't a drop-dead timeline. But what I can tell you is that the fact that we, as a government, within 1 year of taking office, has started this process in earnest is an indication and should give the public an indication of the fact that this is important to the government, and that, you know, as I said, moving beyond the discussion phase that has happened over the last 30 years, but to actually now take action and to move that forward is something that I think the country should be very confident in knowing that this is something that will be taken forward by this government.
Definitely before the next election.
Well, exactly. I mean, we don't know what happens after that, but hopefully, you know, that in itself will give the country comfort in knowing that, you know, you made the right choice when you cast your vote and you elected the officials that you did elect this time around.
Enforcement. That was a word that was heard a couple of times this morning. As we know, enforcement can be a bit of an issue in the Cayman Islands as it pertains to various different things. Mm-hmm. I know you're looking at different ways in which you can make sure enforcement happens as it pertains to minimum wage. What are you looking at in particular? Can you give us an idea?
Well, actually, again, that will be informed by the work of the committee. So to preempt at this stage what is going to be, I'm certainly not in a position to do that. You will recall in my discussions in the Legislative Assembly earlier this year, and just again to let people know that the importance of the timeline, when the private member's motion that came to the House in February of this year wasn't actually accepted by the government because it was asking for a flat rate, I said in my delivery on behalf of the government that we intended to do this process and do it in earnest, and we actually did kick it off within less than 4 months. But a part of that concern that the government had was, how do we actually enforce it? Because we don't want to have another law that's on the book that people are saying, well, we have it in law, but how is it enforced? And obviously we have a regime here that's slightly, well, it's very different than many other countries that have a minimum wage, in that we don't have the direct taxation system that we can get that kind of information from in a very readily accessible manner. So these are the kinds of deliberations that the committee will have to look at to see, well, how do we actually have and create a regime that is enforceable, because that's ultimately what we want, is that when we as a government take the decision to implement an appropriate regime as recommended by the committee, that we actually have comfort in knowing that it's something that can be enforced.
Last question before I hand the mic over to a colleague. Cost. What are the costs associated with this process? Council, the consultation process, so on and so forth.
The original budget is $200,000. Right now, the technical consultation that we are receiving from the ILO consultant is free, and basically we would only have to pay for his visits. But $200,000 is the budget that we have for this process.
Good morning, Wendy from CNS. Minister, can you say whether you actually support it now or not? Because you haven't actually said this morning that there will definitely be a minimum wage and that you're all for it. So I'd just like to get your political position on whether you do or don't support it. And secondly, looking more closely at these issues of enforcement, do any of you have an opinion now from working on the committee why it's taking the Cayman Islands so long to grapple with a subject that most of the Western countries dealt with years and years ago? But firstly, I'd like to know whether the Minister supports it or not.
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question, Wendy, because I want to make it very clear that I actually never said that I didn't support it. I think a lot of people have just made that conclusion and jumped to that understanding because I didn't actually campaign on the issue of a minimum wage. But what I did campaign on was the idea of a livable wage. Now, I don't want to go into a discussion about that, but suffice it to say that the idea of having a wage regime that recognizes the value of the employees, recognizes the contribution that the employees make to the organization, but also a wage regime that continues to allow employment opportunities to be available is something that I'm very much in support of. And so therefore, this process is a process that is very much in tandem with trying to determine how do we actually recognize and to address issues of exploitation, which we know exists, looking at providing real relief to the lowest paid workers, but also ensuring that we improve employment opportunities for Caymanians and in somehow making sure that that is front and center when we come to determine what that regime should be.
In terms of the second question you asked, Wendy, the short answer is because it's complicated. The process of determining a minimum wage is a very complex process. It involves many facets, and every one of those is interrelated, interconnected. And so, quite frankly, the committee is tasked with making recommendations that maximize utility for the employees, but also support the economy by not overtaxing employers. And at the end of the day, if this is unsustainable for employers, then overall employment drops, and we have a bigger unemployment issue than we had to begin with. So we have to ensure that the work is balanced, that it's fair, that it addresses exploitation, as the Minister said, that it provides real relief for employees, but that it is done in a way that supports the strengthening of the economy and not the weakening of the economy.
And just to add to that as well, just to answer a political question with a political answer, there is a lot of talk, and as I said, there's been talk for a number of decades, and it sounds good to talk about the need to have a minimum wage, but there has been very clear lack of political will to take this process forward. And I want to say that this government has demonstrated by the fact that we are here today, and we've taken this process to the point of this, at this point, and I have confidence, every confidence that the committee will continue to carry out its mandate and to deliver a report as it was asked to do. That, as I said, is a clear demonstration of the political will that we have as a government to ensure that we give due consideration and to make sure we move this conversation beyond a conversation, but actually take action as a result.
Perhaps I could jump in and just add a comment about compliance, because cost and compliance is going to become front and center in the government's decision in this matter. I think we can all accept that. That's the reason why we have a number of government departments and agencies represented on this particular committee, because what we don't want to do, quite frankly, is to create another round of bureaucratic machinery that's going to be costly and difficult to maneuver through. So this exercise has to be one that is based on simplicity, cost efficiency, and effective control in order to maximize compliance. So we want to make it as easy as possible and as cost effective as possible. We don't want to add any unnecessary expense at all. So that's another one of the challenges that we're going to be faced with.
Jamie with Radio Cayman, good morning. Just one question for Mr. Hurlston. You'd mentioned in the 9 points the committee's been looking at since, I guess, early June. One of them was international research. I was curious if you could elaborate on that, what it is specifically you're looking at internationally, be it, comparable wages and what might fit for Cayman, be it tiered or otherwise, the implementation process, and where specifically you guys have been looking.
Sure. Okay, well, first of all, when we began looking, we began by recognizing that Cayman is a relatively new country, particularly when it comes to collection of statistical data and economic data. So we wanted to do some global research to see where the Cayman Islands fit in the global picture. And we benefited from Mrs. Knowles' visit in that, although she's a national of New Zealand, she had considerable experience in the subject of minimum wage. So we benefited from her knowledge, and she left us with a number of ideas to consider. Then we took research from international journals. We looked at research that was done by the Low Pay Commission in the United Kingdom. We looked at Canada, and we looked at some parts of the United States so that we could get a feel for what is happening globally. But then we recognized that Cayman being such a small place and being an island community, we really need to look at models that are jurisdictional and relative in size, etc. So we began to focus a little bit more on smaller populations. And I believe that when you see the final report of the committee, you'll appreciate that we started out by looking at industrialized countries and what they have done and ways in which they may have failed in some respects. And then we've narrowed it down to a smaller population base. And then finally, we're going to try and focus on what it is that makes the Cayman Islands unique, because we are uniquely mixed in terms of demographics. We are uniquely mixed in terms of our cultural norms, and we are uniquely mixed in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve with this. So we have to ultimately find a Cayman Island solution that is Cayman-based.
Thanks. And just one for the Minister, really quickly. There was a recent survey done by the Chamber of Commerce in terms of Sunday trading, which is another hot-button issue in Cayman. But there was only about 164 respondents to that consultation in that survey. Just curious how optimistic you are you're going to get the feedback necessary, or enough feedback for this. I know it is a very hotly contested issue in Cayman, but are you confident the public's going to really chime in on this?
Well, the government has taken a position on this, as was expressed by the Premier at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon recently, and that basically the government has decided, based on various feedback received, that survey and otherwise, that the intention is to not make Sunday a full trading day, but to regularize the situation as it stands now. So there wouldn't be an expansion of the Sunday trading law, just to look at basically what's happening with respect to the shops as it relates to the little corner stores and the gas stations. But that is the extent of the government's intention. So there will be no making Sunday into a full trading day, which again was the purpose of the public consultation, was to get the feedback and the views. And we heard from enough people in the community to help the government take that decision, which we think is the right decision.
I just want to clarify, because I thought I heard you say fairly unequivocally earlier on that there is going to be a minimum wage, and this is a matter of deciding what it is. And then it seemed less clear when you're answering Wendy's questions.
No. She asked my question specific about whether I support. So there is no unequivocal decision there. The decision that the government has taken is that we want to follow the process of the law in order to determine an appropriate minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So the question that I answered was that I never said I didn't support a minimum wage. What I did campaign on was the idea of a livable wage. But as I said, that's me in my personal capacity. I am now a member of the government, and the government has taken a collective decision to move the process of determining that of a minimum wage. Again, if you look to see, a livable wage is actually something that takes into other considerations, but a minimum wage regime is what the country is looking to put into place. It'll be that of legislation, but it has to be informed, it has to be thorough, and it has to consider the ramifications, as the acting chief officer as well as members of the panel has explained.
So there's no question then of this report coming to the House and then a decision being taken, actually, let's leave the minimum wage for now?
Well, again, I can't preempt the rest of the government. All I'm saying is that the government as a whole, that is the cabinet with the support of the backbench, will have to make a determination as to what that rate is. It will then obviously have to be decided by the Legislative Assembly. So that's the process of making any changes to the law that will take place.
Sorry, I must have forgot my question then. Think about what you said. It'll come to me. Quite important.
Tammy will think of a question.
I'm good.
Wendy, you're under pressure.
I think what James was seeking was, I think you had answered it earlier, we will see something before the next election by way of a change to the law.
Well, again, that ultimately, that has to, the decision will be taken by the Legislative Assembly as to what that will be, but the government intends to bring that forward based on the information received. And again, the plan is that the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee makes its recommendations, and as the law clearly states, the government can't make a determination or can't issue an order of such until we've had those recommendations and considered those in detail.
Realistically, the numbers are there in the Legislative Assembly if the government supports it.
Well, that would be with everything that the government takes forward.
You remember now?
Yeah. That remembers my question. You're so lucky. Do we have any figures of people in Cayman are going to be affected, like the wage earners, I mean, not the employers, the employees that will be affected? Like, do we have a rough idea of the number of people that are earning what would be considered a minimum wage? And I know it's difficult to say, well, what's the minimum wage? But if we talk about people earning, say, $7 and less an hour, do we have a figure for that, for those people?
We have statistics from the Economics and Statistics Office that are presented in terms of bands. Persons making from $0 to $800, persons from $801 to $1,600. So all of those statistics are available to us.
Yeah, but does that...
Hang on, because that's obviously that was the question. Is what's the number essentially? How many people are being could fall into the bracket that will be impacted by it?
I think again,
it doesn't have to be
because I mean it's hard because again it's a question that's kind of preempting just by the very nature of your comment of $7 an hour. You're preempting what that wage is going to be. So I think it's very hard for the committee at this stage. I mean, I obviously they're looking at this analysis of those numbers provided by the Economics and Statistics Office, but it's hard to say what that actual number would be without basically saying what the minimum wage is, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's a bit of a circular question because you're asking for the committee to say what that actual number is without actually having gone through to make the determination as to what the wage regime should be. But that information should be readily available. So we can't say, because obviously the common sense would tell you that you can make a judgment about where to say these are the people that are going to be impacted by any minimum wage regime or either their lives improved or whatever. So are we talking about that despite 6 months of work, we still don't know how many people are impacted by low wages here?
No, what we're saying, Wendy, is that to answer your question would be to telegraph where the minimum wage will be set. And the committee is going to give that recommendation. They have purposely set out their work in such a way to gather the information, to analyze the information, but not to telegraph where it will be set, but to ensure that the report clearly sets out the reasons why they make the recommendations that they will ultimately make.
Do you actually have the hourly statistics? I know you said you have who earns 800 or what, but if that's a part-time job, if that's somebody who works 2 hours a week, then they might be earning a very good wage. Do you actually have a breakdown in terms of what people are earning on an hourly basis?
We have statistics gathered from various locations, various organizations. And bear in mind, we're here today to talk about public consultation. And so that information will also factor into the work that the committee is doing.
So you could, in effect, have the data in front of you that says, this many people earn below 5, this many people earn below 7, this many people earn below 10, and you could present that data to the public without, as you say, signposting your intentions on a minimum wage, other than in fairly broad terms.
But the majority of the information that you're speaking about is already publicly available.
Okay, where can we see it?
Economics and statistics reports, compendium of statistics, labor force surveys, census data.
Okay, well, I'll have to get you to show me, because I haven't seen that exactly delineated like that.
It's on the ESO website. They publish all their information.
It's very difficult in that data, though, to actually work out. Sorry, I'm doing it. It's very difficult to work out how many people we are actually talking about because of the way it's presented, the figures in the census. Because I've had to look at this and tried to work it out myself, and I can't.
And again, the number of people that we're talking about is a determinant that's connected to where is the minimum wage set.
Are we talking here? Let's get down to it. Are we talking about impacting thousands and thousands of people, or just a few hundred?
Wendy, it depends on what wage is set. That's a straight answer. It will depend on what wage is set. I'm not going to preempt the work of the committee. The committee is going to do their work, and they're going to make the recommendations, and the government will have to consider the recommendations in the report. Are there any other questions? Nope. All right, well, with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us by television and radio. We are, as I said, looking forward to a very productive public consultation phase and for the committee to finalize their report for the end of February 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.